Well, today's Israel at War update will be a departure from our normal format.
The long ongoing war between Israel and Hamas has had the world mostly as spectators for decades. Unsurprisingly, the war has taken a toll on both sides, and there have been several casualties. However, the latest developments and their impact on the world are nothing less than shocking. Most of the events in Israel have been escalating for the worse since the start of 2023. Attack of Hamas on Israelis' overpowered retaliation, several unjust attacks, employing nuclear weapons, and most recently, the building of the Third Temple. What else has occurred that strayed the world from religion and towards neutrality? Let's find out. Before diving deeper into the current imbalances in Israel in terms of the economic, military, political, and religious sectors, it is best to know its history so as to understand what led Israel to its seemingly unending upheaval. Israel is located in the Middle East, along the eastern coastline of the Mediterranean Sea. It shares its borders with Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. The state's heritage is deeply rooted in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, which the Holy Book accounts to its predecessor as being Abraham, who yielded to God's commandment to leave his home to find a promised land, Canaan. However, upon his arrival, the land was already occupied by the indigenous people, the Canaanites tribes like the Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites. As expected, Canaan was far different compared to Ur, his homeland, and so was their lifestyle and religion. Abraham, his wife, Sarai, and nephew, Lot, stuck out as a sour tomb in a foreign land. Their form of commerce was agriculture and trade, and they served an unseen God, which was brow-raising during the time. This cultural and religious shock unsurprisingly resulted in a lot of tension, which did not deter the group from settling among the strangers. These religious books do not have definite accounts of the tribe's relationship with one another, but surely attest to the fulfillment of the prophecy of Abraham being great and becoming a father of many nations. In several civilizations after the biblical era, it seems the tension and tolerance of the two groups have stretched thin and have their band-aid ripped open. From the 11th BCE, between the reign of King Saul and King Solomon, this upheaval led to the building of the First Temple as an honor to Yahweh and as a symbol of peace and stability. After the regime of Solomon, the kingdom was split, and Canaan became divided into two, a united monarchy between Israel and Judah. It was classified as Northern and Southern Kingdom under the reign of Rehoboam during 975 BC. Unfortunately, the power struggle further escalated the disunity and insecurity in Israel around 722 BC. The Assyrians organized themselves and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in 568 BC. The Babylonians conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the First Temple, which led to a series of invasions by different groups such as Egyptians, Mamelukes, Islamists, Arabs, Fatimids, and Seljuk Turks. This period was recorded to be the fall of Jerusalem from glory. Babylon was also captured by the Persians, which led to the change of power being handed to Cyrus the Great, who permitted the Jews to return to Palestine and indirectly allowed for the reconstruction of the temple. Nehemiah, one of the prophets held in captivity, was commanded by God to oversee the rebuilding in 538 BC. By 515 BC, all reconstruction had been completed. In the 1st century CE, Christianity emerged in Jerusalem and spread throughout the Greco-Roman world. The new religion was centered on salvation through Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the proclaimed Son of God. The ministry of Christ was short-lived, but sufficient enough to result in thousands of conversions and become recognized as a religion. However, it seems the upheaval in Jerusalem was not totally laid to sleep. In 70 CE, Jerusalem was reclaimed by the Romans, who destroyed the Second Temple as a form of oppression. The Jews have undergone several cultural shocks, religious merges, and political, economic, and geographical changes. It is more than difficult to trace its religious roots to its current state of evolution. Today, the states of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, Jordan, and the southern portions of Syria and Lebanon are what made up the land of Canaan. From 1919 to 1923, there was another fresh wave of tension for the Jewish people in the wake of the Holocaust and other anti-Semitic activities in Europe. A large population of Jews, over 2,367,000 Jews, left Europe and fled to Palestine for safety. This period was known as the Aliyah, which means ascent or rise or migration to Israel in Jewish. Palestine, due to the Jewish migrant settlement, was forced to undergo rigid and fast socio-political, religious, and economic changes among other states in the Middle East. During this period, the Zionist movement arose as a resistance to the oppression of Jews. It advocated for equality of all races and religious groups. There were tensions from other Arab countries due to their displeasure with the Jewish expansion into and outside of Palestine. They feared the invasion prompted by the Zionist movement, which encouraged Jewish settlement in the area. The territorial independence of Palestine was greatly threatened as the British government imposed the Balfour Declaration. The mandate approved support for Palestine to become the national home for the Jewish people, despite the obvious resistance and agitation of the Arabs and indigenous Palestinians. Despite the displeasure, the Jewish immigrants began investments for long-term settlement, such as purchasing lands, building homes, opening businesses, and engaging in agricultural activities. In Hebrew terms, this is known as kibbutzim and moshavim, which means a collection of agricultural settlements belonging to a group. As several Jewish communities grew, there were clashes in political, economic, religious, and territorial rights. This tension continued to rise, and it resulted in a full-blown resistance by the Palestinians in 1937, after the Second World War. The Palestinians wanted independence from the Jews' continuous immigration and settlement in their lands. Throughout the immigration, over 700,000 Palestinians and half the Arab population were displaced to make accommodations for the Jews, most of which had to seek refuge in Jordan, Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria. Over the years, Palestinians have sought that the displaced refugees should be allowed to return to their homes and have permanence with their heritage and descendants. However, Israel refused any resettlement proposal of Palestinians and insisted the refugees must remain outside of its borders. These differences unavoidably led to several clashes between the Jews and the Arabs. The tension between the two broke out in 1948, resulting in the Arab-Israeli War after the U.S. introduction of Resolution 181, also known as the Partition Resolution, which proposed Palestine to be divided into Jewish and Arab states. However, this was not the major cause of the war outbreak. On the same day, Friday, May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was established and declared an independent Jewish state. Israel was headed by a council of government and David Ben-Gurion, who later became the prime minister of the state. David asserted that the Jews, even from ancient times, had never been opportune to have a permanent dwelling place without exile or persecution. It was his goal during the trying times to ensure the Jews had a permanent home during his declaration of the State of Israel. Despite Israel being a recognized state in the international system, decades later, there is still no tolerance of the group from one another. The tension keeps brewing, and wars continue to break out. Is there a common ground? Despite the differences between the Middle Eastern states, they still have a common denominator: religious groups of Abrahamic heritage. However, what was thought to be the symbol of their reconciliation resulted in more disdain for one another. The Jerusalem Temple is of symbolic importance to the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Jerusalem to the three faiths is a presentation of the link between them and heaven. For Jews, it is the city of David. For Christians, it is the city of Jesus Christ. For Muslims, it is the city of Muhammad. None of the states wants rights to the holy place exclusive to another faith and believes their religion has more rights to Jerusalem than the other two religions. Palestinians want East Jerusalem to become the capital of their state. In contrast, Israel wants to retain Jerusalem as its rightful heir to the city of David. There have been several clashes and debates on the status of Jerusalem. There was even more anger and protest in 2018 after Jerusalem was recognized as Israel's capital by former U.S. President Donald Trump. Formerly known as Jerusalem or Yerushalayim during the 14th century BCE, Jerusalem has been dated to be over 6,000 years ago by archaeologists and traced to the city of Rushalimim and referenced as an enemy of the pharaoh in an ancient Egyptian list dating from the 19th century BCE, about 4,700 years ago. From religious accounts, Jerusalem has been subjected to at least 20 civilizations being captured and held in exile. During 721 BC, the Assyrians captured Samaria, which led to Jews fleeing to Jerusalem as a sanctuary until the city was destroyed by Sennacherib in 701 BC. The people were captured by another group, the Babylonians, in 586 B, and in 539 BC, they became exiles to the Persians. After this period, there was a long reign of peace until 63 BC when the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem, which led to a series of captivities by Persians, Byzantines, the Prophet Muhammad, Caliph Omar, and Christian crusaders, to mention a few. Jerusalem holds a lot of religious and historic landmarks for the three faiths, and having Israel or any of the states having legal rights is a recipe for disaster. There are religious landmarks such as the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, the Tower of David, the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, the Ibrahimi Mosque, the Yad Vashem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and several more. These landmarks have modeled the life and times of followers for several decades and affected all aspects of their lives. Denying one faith over another the right to the territory as predicted is the major reason for the never-ending conflict. It seems the truth of it is that Jerusalem belongs to everyone and no one. Jerusalem's sovereignty seems to be determined by complex expectations, and it has had a historic influence on several groups and religions. It seems Jerusalem stands as a unifier of humanity regardless of class, race, or group. Unfortunately, the quest for having Jerusalem as an exclusive capital has blinded the religious groups to a shadow of its representation. Jerusalem has now been placed as the spoils of the victor and not a place of sacred holiness. Presently, the ongoing conflict has had the faiths under condemnation for subjecting themselves to unspeakable losses for selfish interests. Many remain in disbelief of the reason for the bloodbath, ultimately discrediting the three faiths as being chaotic and vengeful. As of recent times, the significance of Jerusalem to the world of faith keeps depreciating, and many consider it to be a chain holding back peace among the three religions. Is the construction of a third temple in Israel the solution to the tension? Recently, in an attempt to create a neutral ground for diplomacy among the warring states, there has been a new proposal to build a third temple in Israel. However, there have been several controversies that surround the construction. Will it result in a peaceful end, or will it be a trigger of future civil war? Let's dive into the religious significance of the Third Temple and its influence on the three Abrahamic faiths. It is not uncommon knowledge among the Jews that the temple cannot be rebuilt unless they have full authority over the Temple Mount. According to their faith, whoever holds power over the Temple Mount will also have power over Jerusalem and all of Israel. Jews see the rebuilding of the temple as necessary to declare victory over their enemies. This is used as a means to assert their dominance. The Jewish temple's reconstruction is the pinnacle of global bragging rights. The Third Temple has been a subject of prophecy for several centuries. It has been stated to be the symbol of the second coming of Christ, the Messiah of the Christian faith. From religious history, the departure of God from the Third Temple brought about calamity. Until it was restored, there was no form of peace, which by speculation might be linked to Israel-Hamas's never-ending war. The Third Temple, when rebuilt, would be a permanent temple for God's dwelling, and by faith would bring to an end the religious wars in the Middle East. Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount or Mount Moriah, holds high significance as it is home to the dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the first monumental building in Islamic history. For Christians, the Temple Mount is the center of most religious activities and life, including the ministry of the Son of God. For the Jews, it serves as a religious spiritual center, and the holiest site worthy enough to be home to the First and the Second Temple. Rebuilding the Third Temple is not a recent strategic plan for Israel to have a religious advantage over Palestine. Preparations for its reconstruction began in 1987 by the Temple Movement and are being supervised by the director of the Temple Mount Faithful, Gershon Salomon. Putting the construction plan to swing, sacred worship vessels and priestly garments to be worn by the Levites have been provided, as well as the training of several youths to become temple priests. Also, a red heifer has been given for the service and is ready for the purity ritual upon the temple's construction. The red heifer's ashes, alongside waters of purification, are to be used against high-level defilement, such as contact with the dead. The red heifer is believed to serve in some way as atonement for the sins of the Israelites for worshipping the golden calf when they were brought out of Egypt. Unfortunately, the population of red heifers without blemish is very low, and rabbis have only just begun rearing the animals for religious beliefs and monitoring their lifestyle in order to be able to increase their reproduction rate. Rabbi Nachman Kahane, the chairman of the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, who is very involved in training temple rebuilding volunteers, stated that most preparations to start the temple are being put in place. He believes that the temple will be built on the Temple Mount in his lifetime. While his wishes may or may not come to pass, what is even more worrying is the aftermath of the reconstruction. There is no guarantee for peace or the security of Israel. There have been several attempts to reach a diplomatic negotiation on the construction of the temple. This is because the third temple is designed to replace a major Islamic shrine, the Dome of the Rock, which undoubtedly will cause confrontation and conflict on both sides. There have been attempts at agreements such as the Oslo Accords dubbed by both parties to put an end to their decades-long conflict. There have also been other negotiations such as the Camp David Accords, the Madrid Peace Conference, the Gaza-Jericho Agreement, and even the Oslo II Accord. So far, Israel remains adamant as to having exclusive rights to the Temple Mount. The government has been unwavering and truly believes they are on the right part of history. The question now is, will religious extremists drag Israel down again? The pursuit of the Messiah was once the reason for Jews fleeing Eastern Europe, and during the Zionist movement, the concept of Messiah was pushed back in favor of the war against oppression. Now, over 75 years later, Israel seems headstrong against the rest of the world over an issue that could trigger the outbreak of a global war or cause tension in the international system. It seems Israel is on its agenda despite the temple's foundation being raised continuously with the number of bodies from its relentless attack on Palestine's Gaza Strip. According to the health ministry, not less than 17,000 have lost their lives in the process. It seems the aim is not a counterattack against Hamas, but a bold attempt to decapitate Palestine's military and government sectors, not considerate of what or who was at stake. It seems the aim is to empty Gaza of its people and expand their territory in the land. This can be backed by the recent report that over 85% of Gaza's population, which is about 1.9 million people, have been displaced from their homes and constantly fleeing while hungry and severely injured. Will there be peace in the Middle East? Or is this the escalation of violence and aggression? Is there a middle ground for all three faiths to compromise and have parts of their goals satisfied without being at the expense of another group? Or is Israel going ahead with its executive and exclusive operations at the expense of the world? It seems the next cause of action will determine the world's response. Whether or not they emerge victorious, the world's and believers' outlook of faith in God is marked by excessive bloodshed and violence. Is the world playing a spectator's part in the conflict, or have any measures been taken to regulate Israel in the massacre of its neighboring state? What are your thoughts on Israel's insistence on a third temple? Could it possibly lead to a global upheaval? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click on the notification for updates on new videos.